This week, Ukrainian fighters secured their positional superiority with their tactical maneuvers. The fighters did not turn a blind eye to the invading Russians. Putin is already mired in various political troubles. The failure of Putin's plans on the fronts undermines the confidence of the soldiers in him. Yesterday we told you about the constant change in the duties of the commanders in the Russian army. This shows that the chain of command among the Russians is not solid. How successful can an army be when management is in trouble? There is a lot of news from the south today. Ukrainian warriors assembled here the most advanced weapons in their arsenal. After that, the warriors carried out a series of deadly attacks. The target of the first blow was Tokmak. Tokmak is one of the largest prefrontal towns. For this reason, Tokmak has become one of the most important logistics centers where the Russians deployed tens of thousands of soldiers and a large number of ammunition depots, equipped warehouses, and command points. Ukrainian fighters today launched a HIMARS attack on Russian military bases on the northwestern outskirts of the town near the old poultry farm. The attack itself did a lot of damage to the Russian camp. The Russian forces thought the attack was over. However, just at this time, Ukrainian fighters carried out the second attack, along with longer-range, multiple-launch rocket systems. The second attack was even more devastating. The Ukrainians knew that the Russians usually sent large numbers of soldiers to clear the area after an attack, which meant that this would be an excellent opportunity to double the damage. The target of the second attack was Berdyansk. Berdyansk is also one of the largest logistics centers in Russia. This is because Berdyansk has a large port stretching between Melitopol and Mariupol and many industrial areas that can be used to store ammunition and equipment. Ukrainian forces launched multiple Storm Shadow missiles targeting the industrial area. Russian sources claim that the Russians managed to shoot down almost all the missiles. Despite everything, some missiles reached their predetermined destinations. After that, they destroyed the Russian military base and command posts on the territory of the port. However, this was still not the greatest loss for the Russians. Later, Ukrainians also targeted the Dune Hotel in the southeast of the town. However, Ukrainian fighters completely destroyed this hotel. This hotel served as the command headquarters of the 58th Russian Army. Therefore, the Ukrainians eliminated the commander of the Russian Southern Military District, Lieutenant General Oleg Sokov. This was another terrible loss for the Russians. The invaders are being shaken by bigger blows every day. Ukrainian warriors are literally reaping the fruits of their perseverance. Sokov was one of the most experienced generals in the Russian army. He fought in the First and Second Chechen Wars and in Syria. Even Sokov was wounded near the front line in the Luhansk region last year. Sokov was an astute commander-in-chief. Sokov had about 85,000 soldiers at his disposal. Other sources state that Sokov was not alone in the headquarters and that the strike likely eliminated division and brigade commanders as well. A few days ago we said that the Russian army had lost another high commander. The captain of the second rank was killed during the normal morning run of Stanislav Rozhitsky. Ukrainian intelligence stated that an unknown person was waiting for Rozhitsky near the stadium. This person shot Rozhitsky 7 times and disappeared. Russian sources complained that the assassination was orchestrated by the Ukrainian secret services. However, the head of Ukrainian intelligence denied these allegations. Rozhitsky was the commander of the submarine Krasnodar, which launched caliber cruise missiles at Ukrainian cities. As a result, Ukrainian fighters managed to wipe out Russian military camps with HIMARS warriors, thus developed a destructive tactic. In addition, Ukrainian troops carried out a very effective series of Storm Shadow attacks, further reducing the number of skilled Russian commanders. Today, French President Macron approved the shipment of the French Scalp missile, which is the equivalent of even more Storm Shadow missiles. That's why we're definitely going to see a lot more of these types of attacks in the near future. According to local Ukrainian military officials, Russian forces bombed a humanitarian headquarters and residential areas in the city of Kherson. As a result, the invaders injured 5 people. The village of Sofiyivka was attacked with Grad rockets. After that, a civilian died to coincide with the NATO summit. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu claimed that the Russian forces advanced 1.5 kilometers near the town of Lyman in the Donetsk region, Shoigu announced on Russian state television that Russian troops launched a counterattack, moving 1.5 kilometers along 2 kilometers of the front. Pro-Russian sources in this area stated that the armed forces of the Russian Federation advanced along the front in Novoselivka area to a depth of 1 kilometer. Then it was stated by the media that the Russians occupied part of the Kupiansk-Kreminna highway. The Ukrainian General Staff denied the success of Russian attacks in the region, and the General Staff of Ukraine stated that the Ukrainian soldiers are holding their ground. Ukrainian air defense systems were deployed around Kiev early this morning. Russian forces attempted to strike the ports of Odessa on the first day of the NATO summit and before the Black Sea grain agreement expired on July 17. A Kremlin-affiliated military blogger stated that the Ukrainian forces systematically targeted Russian-occupied infrastructure in the Zaporizhia and Kherson regions, particularly the resting centers used by Russian forces as headquarters and command points. According to the occupation authorities, explosions were heard in the occupied city of Skadovsk yesterday. On the other hand, good news is coming for Ukraine. French President Emmanuel Macron announced at the NATO summit that France will hand over long-range missiles to Ukraine. Macron did not mention the name of the weapon. However, this weapon is most likely equivalent to the UK's Storm Shadow. It wouldn't be wrong to assume that this new French missile will be the Scalp missile. France has also committed to a $188 million military aid package. The United Kingdom has announced a new $65 million military aid package for Ukraine, including Challenger, 2 munitions and around 70 infantry fighting vehicles. The White House is currently considering providing long-range missiles to Ukraine. Pro-Russian sources said Ukrainian forces had occupied new positions around Khrushchevka in the southwest flank of Bakhmut. Ukrainian troops managed to break into the defense of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. 1.5 kilometers from Rostov-Krasnolika is about 5 kilometers north of Bakhmut. Wherever the Ukrainian fighters go, victory follows them. The political agenda is still mixed today. And again, this mess is not for Putin's sake. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, whom Vladimir Putin calls my dear friend, has dealt a series of major blows to the Russian president in just 1 week. We said that Erdogan gave the Azov regiment commanders back to Zelensky. So this is just the beginning. Erdogan urged the North Atlantic Treaty Organization last weekend to expedite Ukraine's application for membership in the military alliance. If Ukraine becomes a member, NATO will defend the country in a war against Russia. Since the invasion began, Finland has joined the alliance, while Erdogan has prevented Sweden from joining the alliance. How will Putin react to Erdogan's support for something that might hinder him? We'll see in the future. Russian leader Vladimir Putin continues to decry hard blows in succession. First of all, the mistake made by Belarus, known as an ally of Russia, led to the loss of thousands of Russian soldiers' lives. The Belarusian army has completely neutralized the Russian soldiers stationed on the Ukrainian border. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu's wife spoke very harshly to Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko. Shoigu's decrees may lead to the end of the alliance between Putin and Lukashenko. While such a crisis decayed between Belarus and Russia, the blowing up of the Russian Navy ship anchored 160 kilometers away in the Straits of Turkey was another blow to Putin. The Russian Navy blowing up inside the Turkish sea borders has driven Vladimir Putin crazy. Turkish President Erdogan, known as a close friend of Putin, is having a very difficult time, as it is known. While the war between Russia and Ukraine was continuing, the course of the war changed greatly and the war suddenly decamped to the borders of Russia. Wagner mercenary company Yevgeny Prigozhin's attempt to stage a coup in Russia led to the war on Ukrainian soil, reaching a very different dimension. Although Prigozhin gave up on the coup he wanted to carry out in Russia, the consequences of this coup attempt were very severe for Russia. Thousands of Russian soldiers who fought for Vladimir Putin on the territory of Ukraine have completely lost their trust in Putin. The patience of Russian soldiers who have been fighting on Ukrainian territory since the beginning of the war has run out. For this reason, during Prigozhin's coup attempt, thousands of Russian soldiers left the army and wanted to join the Wagner soldiers. However, when Prigozhin withdrew Wagner troops from the cities of Rostov and Voronezh, the Russian soldiers who left the army were left alone. Thousands of Russian troops, unwilling to continue the war on Ukrainian territory any longer, wanted to leave Ukraine through the borders of Belarus. But these Russian soldiers who wanted to leave Ukraine were attacked by Belarusian border guard soldiers. Thousands of Russian soldiers who remained in the firing line of Belarusian soldiers were surprised at what they suffered. As for the details of the news, for a long time, Russian soldiers deployed to the towns of Hrodnia and Snovsk towns near the Ukrainian border with Belarus wanted to flee Ukraine, unable to stand the unfavorable conditions created by the war any longer. However, according to the new law issued by Vladimir Putin, Russian soldiers who tried to flee the war or refused to fight would be decried with prison sentences of between 5 and 10 years. Thus, Russian soldiers realized that they could not return to Russia if they fled the war. The vast majority of Russian soldiers who are living almost a prison life in Ukraine are either surrendering to the Ukrainian army or trying to save their lives by applying for asylum in neighboring countries of Ukraine. But for the first time, a large number of Russian soldiers tried to leave Ukrainian territory through the borders of Belarus. But this effort of the Russian soldiers was blocked by the Belarusian army. The Belarusian army not only prevented the escape of Russian soldiers, but also led to the serious injury of hundreds of Russian soldiers. Russian soldiers who set out from the Russian headquarters, established in the cities of Hrodnia and Snovsk, disobeyed the orders of their unit commanders and started a riot inside the headquarters. Realizing that they would be arrested for this rebellion they had caused, the Russian soldiers left the headquarters on the same day and headed for the Belarusian border. The fugitive Russian soldiers who thought that they could enter the borders of Belarus because Belarus and Russia were allies were quite wrong about this. Russian soldiers who managed to get as close as the city of Novaya Guta, located on the Belarusian border with Ukraine, were stopped by Belarusian border guards before they could set foot on Belarusian territory. Thousands of Russian soldiers were subjected to attacks by Belarusian soldiers. According to information obtained from regional sources, a large number of Russian soldiers were killed in this attack by the Belarusian army, while hundreds of Russian soldiers were seriously injured. At the same time, a large part of the Russian soldiers who survived and tried to cross the Belarusian border had to turn back. Despite the fact that Russia and Belarus are allies, the fact that the Belarusian army carried out such an attack on Russian soldiers shocked the whole world. But the real face of the business was revealed later. The Belarusian commander who gave the order to fire at the Russian soldiers did not know that these soldiers approaching the border were Russian soldiers. The Belarusian commander, aware that the course of the war in Ukraine had turned in favor of Ukraine after the coup, events in Russia, thought that these soldiers approaching the Belarusian border were Ukrainian soldiers. The Russian soldiers had disguised themselves as civilians by removing the military uniforms they had worn to escape from Ukrainian territory. For this reason, the Belarusian commander was completely unaware that these soldiers belonged to the Russian army. However, the weapons found in the hands of the soldiers were a sufficient reason for the Belarusian commander to order an attack. The first reaction to this incident on the border between Ukraine and Belarus came from Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. Russian Minister Sergei Shoigu has almost lashed out at Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko for his statement. Shoigu, who targeted President Lukashenko, said that such a mistake cannot be forgiven and that Belarus is responsible for the loss of hundreds of Russian soldiers' lives. Shoigu decried the need to suspend the alliance agreement between Russia and Belarus and stated that he would meet with Vladimir Putin privately about this issue. As it is known, a large number of Russian soldiers, weapons and ammunition were taken to the territory of Belarus by Vladimir Putin. These Russian soldiers are training Belarus soldiers. Shoigu, on the other hand, stated that they would withdraw the Russian soldiers sent to the territory of Belarus. Shoigu not only withdrew these soldiers, but also demanded the return of all military equipment sent to Belarus in recent months. Another of Shoigu's special requests is that the Belarusian troop commander who gave the order to shoot at Russian soldiers be transferred to Russia and tried in Russian courts. Minister Shoigu decried such a mistake as inexcusable and demanded that the commander who ordered the attack be tried by Russian courts, so that ties between Belarus and Russia are not completely severed. This tension between Shoigu and Lukashenko led to the emergence of claims that the alliance between Vladimir Putin and Lukashenko has come to an end. Decapitation between Shoigu and Lukashenko. It is not possible for Defense Minister Shoigu to make such statements on his own. Many expert investigators say that Putin is also aware of Shoigu's statements and that Shoigu is only being used as an intermediary. If these claims are true, this mistake of the Belarusian army may have led to the complete decoupling of the alliance between Russia and Belarus. However, while such a big crisis was taking place between Russia and Belarus, the blowing up of a Russian Navy ship within the maritime borders of Turkey, which decried a neutral policy in the war, shocked the whole world. The Russian Navy ship that was blown up 160 kilometers from the Turkish Straits off the Black Sea managed to enter the whole world agenda. But there was only one question on everyone's mind: what was the Russian Navy ship doing inside the Turkish maritime borders? And why did Turkey destroy a Russian Navy ship? Clashes between Ukrainian forces and Russia's mercenary contractor, Wagner PMC, were the fiercest throughout the war. The Kremlin government recently updated its target in Ukraine as the Donbas region. The Russian army concentrated almost all its military facilities in the cities of Luhansk and Donetsk, which are called the Donbas region. Russian leader Vladimir Putin authorized the Wagner PMC soldiers, who are more useful to the Russian army on the battlefield than the Russian soldiers, to command offensive operations in the Bakhmut region. As a result of clashes between Wagner, PMC mercenaries and Ukrainian forces, control constantly changed hands at some points in the Donbas region. After making minor progress in both groups, they are forced to give back the lands they won. It is not possible for the soldiers of the Wagner PMC group to cope alone with the Ukrainian troops with modern weapons and a large number of military manpower. For this reason, the soldiers in the Wagner PMC organization support their own operations by coordinating the soldiers included in the Russian army. As part of the mobilization, however, the mobilized Russian soldiers were in no way effective against the Ukrainian troops. With modern weapons and combat tactics, Russian forces have made noticeable and confirmed advances at Soledar, just 10 kilometers north of Bakhmut. But Ukrainian forces retain control of the settlement. Satellite images show a Wagner Group fighter at the Artyomsol factory in central Soledar. In addition, Wagner Group forces are allegedly fighting around Soledar on the streets of Hrodnia, Krasnohorivka, Krasnopilya, Blahodayton, Rostelika, and Vesely, and Wagner Group fighters have taken complete control of Hrodnia. A Ukrainian military reporter posted a photo with location information in front of the Soledar salt mine in northwest Soledar. Ukrainian troops hold the northwestern part of the settlement and repel reported Russian attacks on this part of the mine. Sergei Sharavathy, spokesman for the Eastern Forces Group of Ukraine, dismissed Russia's manipulative claims that Ukrainian troops had withdrawn from Soledar. Some attacks by the Ukrainian army, and the results of these attacks confirm what Sergei Sharavathy said. An infantry group of Russian forces moved to target a fort of Ukrainian forces in the direction of Bakhmut, the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine. A group of Border Guard snipers stated that it stopped the advance of Russian infantry in one of the directions near Bakhmut. Ukrainian forces lured the Russian invaders in front of snipers with rabbits. Snipers from the Ukrainian State Border Guard detected the Russian commander leading the group. The commander of the Ukrainian snipers neutralized the Russian commander with well-aimed shots after the soldiers in the Russian unit lost their commanders' lives. The Russian soldiers in the region were afraid and fled. A few days ago, a Ukrainian special operations sniper took down the Russian soldiers hiding in the trees from miles away. The Ukrainian army is trying to protect its castles in the Donbas region with all its might so that the course of the war continues in favor of the Ukrainian forces. Simultaneously with the snipers of the Ukrainian Border Guard, the command of the Special Operations Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine launched an attack on Russian military elements in the direction of Bakhmut. The press service of the Special Operations Forces Command of the Armed Forces of Ukraine published a video on the social media platform regarding the details of the attack on Russian military elements as seen in the video. Ukrainian Special Operations Forces used mortars to stop the approaching Russian attacks on the town. The video clearly showed the impact of the professional work of Special Operations Forces operators on Russian soldiers. Sergei Sharavathy, spokesman for the Eastern Group of the Armed Forces, pointed out that the town of Soledar in the Donetsk region is under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces. According to Sharavathy, Fierce battles are currently taking place at various points in the Bakhmut region. He emphasized that there were 76 bombings and 10 war conflicts. Only today, Sharavathi, spokesman for the Eastern Forces Group, stated that the Ukrainian army and its commanders are doing everything in their power to inflict the maximum damage to the Russian troops. Sharavathi stated that these attacks are also a defensive operation, and the tactic used by the Russian army has not changed for a long time. It is noteworthy that the Russian forces constantly rolled in waves to the positions of the Ukrainian defense forces. In this way, the Russian troops are trying to get a small advantage as a result of the Russian attacks in the direction of Bakhmut. The Ukrainian forces did not leave their defensive positions. However, as we have just described, in some cases, the Ukrainian army took offensive positions and taught the Russian troops an important lesson. Expressing his comments on the situation in Bakhmut, Sharavathi stated that Bakhmut remained under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces and the clashes continued on the Ukrainian and Russian front lines, which Sharavathi described as hell. The outskirts of Bakhmut has so far been one of the busiest areas of all, where clashes and constant bombardment by the enemy take place. The spokesperson for the Eastern Group of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reported that combat operations in the Svatov-Kremenna direction are continuing. The spokesperson stated that the Russian soldiers on the Eastern Front are regrouping, trying to counterattack in certain directions. However, the Russian soldiers suffer significant losses and are withdrawing. The Ukrainian armed forces shapes their own moves. According to the moves of the Russian soldiers, the attacks of the Russian soldiers were not concentrated only in the Bakhmut and Soledar regions. The Ukrainian army reported that Russian attacks were repelled at many points in the long front line. Having suffered heavy losses, the Russian troops attacked in the directions of Bakhmut, Avdiivka and Lyman. Russian troops launched 9 missile strikes, 3 air strikes and 40 MLR strikes. In the past day, the Russian military specifically targeted civilian infrastructure. As a result of these attacks of the Russian army, many civilians lost their lives and were injured. In the Kupiansk and Lyman directions, the regions of Ivanivka-Stel, Makievka, Mieso, Sarika, Ploshchar, Makivka, Nevskaya, Chervona, Popovka and Dybrova in the Luhansk region were subjected to artillery fire in the direction of Bakhmut, Berestov-Bilohorivka, Vesel, Krasnohorivka, Bakhmut, Klitschko, Bielahorodiivka, Zalezna and New York in the Donetsk region were hit. In the region of Avdiivka, Nevelsky, Mariinka and Novomikhailivka in the Donetsk region were hit. In response to these attacks, the Ukrainian Air Force launched airstrikes. Airstrikes on 21 areas of high Russian military concentration and positions of Russian anti-aircraft missile systems. In addition, 3 Russian Orlan-10 drones were shot down by Ukrainian forces. Ukraine missile and artillery units destroyed. A Russian command post, 5 manpower and military equipment clusters and 2 ammunition depots. The knot of the Ukraine-Russia war seems to be unraveling in Bakhmut and its surrounding cities. By capturing the city of Donetsk, the Ukrainian forces want to take the necessary step to expel the Russian forces from Ukrainian territory. To this end, Ukrainian forces must prevent the Russian army from advancing in the direction of Bakhmut. Russian forces, on the other hand, want to reach the depths of Ukraine via Bakhmut in order to maintain their presence in the Donbas region. These cities, which have a very important strategic position, will play a very important role in the course of the war. It will be very difficult for the Russian forces, which does not have enough equipment and military manpower to achieve its goal. But the most important thing this war has taught us is that anything can happen at any moment. Despite the great power difference, the Ukrainian forces showed great resistance against the Russian forces. It is unknown whether the Russian forces will show a similar resistance in the coming days. We will follow the course of the war closely and see what is happening in Ukraine.